want to say at the start that I understand how this will sound. I understand that a person in my position, temporary contract, no benefits, 6-month assignment with a county that can't afford to hire anyone permanent, does not typically file a report like this. Temp workers don't file reports. They fill boxes, scan documents, go home, and hope the contract gets extended. That's the job. I know what the job is. My name is Dana Mercer. From October 2023 through March 2024, I was employed through Tri-State Office Solutions on a document rehousing contract with Jefferson County, Ohio. The work site was the former Steubenville Municipal Natatorium on South 4th Street, a public swimming pool built in 1958, closed in 1991, and converted to county overflow file storage in 1997 when the records annex flooded. The pool was drained, and industrial shelving was installed in the shallow end. The deep end, 12 feet at its lowest point, was used for palletized storage of water-damaged materials awaiting triage. My assignment was the deep end. I need to describe the space because the space matters. You reach the pool floor by a set of aluminum stairs bolted to the wall where the diving board used to be. The tile is still there, pale blue, most of it, with a dark blue lane line running the length of the floor. The ceiling is 34 feet above the deep end floor, which means the acoustics are specific. Not echoey the way a gymnasium is. More vertical. Sound goes up and doesn't come back the same. You speak and the room takes a half second to return your voice. And when it does, it's been cleaned of something. Smoothed. I don't know a technical word for it. The space does something to sound that I am not qualified to describe. But I noticed it on the first day, and I never stopped noticing. The work was straightforward. Open a damaged banker's box, assess the contents for salvageability. If salvageable, rehouse in a new acid-free box with a typed label and a condition note. If unsalvageable, photograph the original label, log the destruction in the database, and shred. Most of the material was tax records from the 70s and 80s. Some was court filings, some was permits. None of it was interesting. All of it was water-stained, and about a third was actively moldy. So I wore an N95 and nitrile gloves every shift. I worked alone. The natatorium is not staffed. County maintenance checks the HVAC monthly. I was given a key, an access code, and a county laptop with the inventory database. My hours were 7 to 3:30 Monday through Friday. I parked in the back lot, entered through the men's locker room to the women's was sealed, walked through the former shower area, which still smells of chlorine in a way that 26 years of disuse has not corrected, crossed the pool deck, and descended the aluminum stairs to my workstation. A folding table, a task light, a shredder, and 1,100 boxes. I completed my first 3 weeks without incident. I was averaging 19 boxes per day, which was above the target of 15. The county liaison, a woman named Gail Fairman, visited once during this period. She checked my log, said I was ahead of schedule, and mentioned that the 2 previous temps on this contract had not completed their terms. One left after 9 weeks, the other after 4, when she said it conversationally. People don't like working alone in a pool. That was her explanation. I told her I preferred it. I need to be precise about what began in the 4th week, because precision is the only thing that separates this from a story someone made up. On a Monday, October 23rd, I arrived at 7, descended the stairs, and found my workstation not as I had left it on Friday. The change was small. 4 boxes from the unprocessed stack had been moved to the south wall of the deep end, approximately 40 feet from my table. They were not opened. They were not damaged. They were simply in a location I had not placed them. They were arranged in a line perpendicular to the wall, evenly spaced at what I later measured to be 14 inches apart. I assumed building maintenance had moved them. I moved them back. I logged nothing. On Tuesday, 3 different boxes had been relocated to the same position, same spacing, same orientation. These were not the same 4 boxes from Monday. I checked the inventory numbers. These were from a different pallet entirely, one I hadn't reached yet. I moved them back. I mentioned it to no one. On Wednesday, I arrived to find 6 boxes against the south wall, same spacing. But this time, one of the boxes was from my completed stack, rehoused, labeled, condition noted. A finished box. And it had been opened. The new lid was off. The contents were undisturbed. But sitting on top of the files was a single sheet of paper that had not been there when I sealed the box on the previous Thursday. It was a photocopy, an old optic. Old, slightly skewed on the page. We got the kind of copy you get from a machine that was already outdated in 1990. It showed a list of names. 26 names handwritten in neat block capitals with a date at the top. November 8th, 1974. I recognized the date before I recognized why. November 8th, 1974 was the Steubenville Crucible Steel explosion. 14 men killed in a furnace failure at the mill on Water Street. It was local history. There's a plaque at the site. I'd walked past it, but the list had 26 names, not 14. 14 were clustered at the top. Below them, separated by a hand-drawn line, were 12 more. No explanation, no heading for the second group. I set the paper aside. I moved the boxes back. I began to feel the specific discomfort that comes not from being frightened, but from being unable to assign a cause. Someone was entering the building, and that was the rational conclusion. Someone with a key. And they were moving boxes and placing documents for me to find. I changed the access code that evening with Gail's permission. I told her I'd found evidence of unauthorized entry. She was unsurprised. She said the building had been broken into twice in the past decade, both times by teenagers, both times through the locker room windows. She had the windows checked. They were intact. Thursday morning, 8 boxes against the south wall, 14 inches apart. A second photocopied sheet, on top of the one I'd already set aside. This one was a blueprint, a partial floor plan of the natatorium. But not the natatorium as it was. The blueprint showed the pool filled, and it showed the space above the pool, the open air between the water's surface and the 34-foot ceiling, as a structured volume. There were lines drawn in that air, curves, annotations in a handwriting I didn't recognize with numbers I didn't understand, and a single English word written at the center of the pool's airspace. Acceptable. I want to describe what I did that Thursday because it matters for what came later. I took both documents, the name list and the blueprint, and I photographed them with my phone. I put the originals in a manila envelope and locked them in my car. I returned to the deep end. I sat at my table. I did not work. I listened. The natatorium was silent the way it always was. Fluorescent hum. The faint push of air through ductwork. The occasional tick of the aluminum stairs contracting in the cold. Nothing else. Nothing that constituted a presence or a sign. I sat for 40 minutes. I went back to work. That evening in my apartment, I looked at the photos more carefully. The name list. I searched the 14 crucible steel victims against public records. All 14 matched known fatalities. I searched the 12 additional names, No matches, not in the explosion, not in Steubenville, not in Jefferson County obituaries from that year. 12 names with no corresponding deaths, no corresponding lives, no corresponding anything. But the names were written in the same hand, same pen, same pressure. They belonged to the same list. The blueprint I could not decode. I'm not an architect. The annotations were numerical. Some looked like frequency measurements, hertz, but I wasn't certain. We, the word acceptable, sat in the center of a volume of empty air above a pool that no longer held water. I went back on Friday, and the south wall arrangement had grown to 11 boxes. I stopped moving them back. I need to tell you about the first lapse. It was the following Wednesday, October 31st. I remember the date because of the irony that I've tried not to think about since. I arrived at 7. I descended the stairs. I sat down. I opened a box. Inventory number J, C4417. Tax records, 1978. Moderate water damage, salvageable. I began the assessment. The next thing I experienced was standing at the south wall. Not walking to the south wall. Not having walked to the south wall. Standing there already, my hands at my sides, my gloves off. My N95 pulled down around my chin. The task light at my workstation was off. Each of the overhead fluorescents were off. The only light was the emergency exit sign at the top of the stairs, 34 feet above me, casting a faint red wash over the tile. My phone said 11:47 a.m. I had lost 4 hours and 40 minutes. The boxes along the south wall were now arranged differently. Not a single line, a curve. 14 boxes tracing an arc that followed the contour of the pool wall. And behind the arc, closer to the wall, 3 more boxes. Not from inventory. I had never seen them before. They were old. Not banker's boxes. Wooden crates, small, the size of a bread loaf, with no markings. My hands were dusty, not file dust, construction dust, ite powder, calcium powder, something mineral and pale that I had not been working with. I climbed the stairs. I washed my hands in the locker room sink. I sat on the bench in the shower area that still smells of chlorine, and I called Gail Fearman. I told her I'd had a dizzy spell and was going home for the day. She said that was fine. She asked if I needed anything. I said no. I didn't tell her about the boxes or the lapse. I can explain why. But the explanation is not flattering. I was afraid of losing the contract. Tri-State had placed me after 11 weeks of nothing. I had rent due. I had a car payment. I had the specific, grinding financial fear of a 41-year-old woman with a bachelor's degree in history and no permanent employment since the position at the Belmont County Historical Society ended in 2022. I needed 6 months of income. The natatorium was the 6 months. So I went back the next day. I set my phone alarm for every 30 minutes. If I lapsed, the alarm would wake me, or at least mark the time. I worked. Box after box. The alarm went off at 7:30, 8 o'clock, 8:30. Each time I was at my table, hands and files fully present. At 9 o'clock, the alarm went off, and I was at my table. At 9:30, the alarm went off, and I was at the south wall. This time I had moved 4 more boxes into the arc. I could see which ones, because they were still slightly damp from my gloved hands. The arrangement was precise. I measured the distances later. 14 inches between each box, consistent to within a quarter inch. The arc was mathematically regular. I could not have placed them that precisely while conscious. I am not a precise person. My handwriting is uneven. I park crooked. I cannot draw a straight line. But my hands during the lapses were meticulous. And let me describe what happened over the next 6 weeks, because the accumulation is the point. The individual events are not dramatic. There were no sounds in the dark. There were no figures in the pool. There were no messages scratched into walls. What happened was that I lost time, 30 minutes to 2 hours per shift, never more. And during each lapse, my body performed work. Specific, careful, physically demanding work that I could not have planned and did not understand. The arc of boxes along the south wall became a more complex structure, an arrangement that grew inward from the walls, following the contour of the deep end, with gaps at regular intervals. By mid-November, it resembled, and I know how this sounds, a seating arrangement. A curved amphitheater of boxes and crates, oriented toward the center of the deep end floor, each where the dark blue lane line ran. The 3 wooden crates I'd found on the first lapse day had been opened during a subsequent lapse. Inside them were objects I could identify but not contextualize. A tuning fork, a surveyor's transit from what appeared to be the 1950s, a folded linen cloth, a bundle of carbon paper sheets, blank, and a book, cloth-bound, no dust jacket, no title on the spine. I opened it during a conscious period. It was handwritten, the same block capitals as the name list. It appeared to be a manual of some kind, instructions for a procedure. The procedure involved the acoustic properties of a specific interior volume. The mathematics were beyond me, but the descriptions were not. Or of course, the manual described a space. The dimensions matched the natatorium, dent M, and it described what the space would do to sound if the interior surfaces were arranged correctly. Not the walls or the ceiling, the contents, the objects on the floor. If you placed materials of specific density at specific locations within the volume, the manual said, the space would function as what it called a credible vessel. A container in which spoken words would be held with what the author described as sufficient fidelity to constitute delivery. Delivery, not echo, not amplification. Delivery, as in, the words would reach someone. I read that manual sitting at my folding table with my lunch untouched, and the fluorescent lights humming above a drained swimming pool in a building that smelled of chlorine and mold. And I understood. Not believed, not felt. Yea, but understood with the mechanical clarity of reading a spec sheet that someone had designed this space to function as an acoustic delivery system for speech, intended for the dead. Building, crate by crate, shift by shift, was the final configuration that would make the space acceptable. That was the word on the blueprint. I went back to the photograph on my phone. Acceptable. Written in the airspace above the pool. Not acceptable to a building inspector, not acceptable to a code, acceptable to the recipients. The sound had to be shaped so precisely that it would constitute arrival. The names had to be spoken in a space configured to carry them to where the named had gone. I began to research. This is what I found. The crucible steel explosion of November 8th, 1974 killed 14 workers in a furnace failure. This is established history. What is not in any published account is that 12 additional men were in the mill that morning. Contract workers, day laborers, men whose employment was informal and whose presence was unrecorded. They died in the same explosion. Their bodies were recovered. But because they were not on any payroll, not in any system, their names were not included in the official casualty count. Their families were not notified through any institutional channel. The plaque on Water Street lists 14 names. 26 men died. I found this not through archives or databases, but through a single source. A 1975 letter in one of the water-damaged boxes I was processing. It was filed with tax records, misfiled, the way important things sometimes survive, by being in the wrong place. The letter was from a man named Emil Moravec to the Jefferson County Commissioners. It requested permission to use the municipal natatorium during its annual winter closure for what Moravec called a community memorial reading. He wanted to read the names of the dead in a space that would, in his words, hold them correctly. The letter was denied. A handwritten note in the margin, unsigned, read, "Not authorized. 14, not 26. See attached." There was no attachment. Emil Moravec. I searched the name. He was a machinist at Crucible Steel. He survived the explosion. He was also, according to a 1962 Steubenville Herald Star article I found through the public library's microfilm, the designer of the municipal natatorium's acoustic specifications. He had consulted on the building's construction as a volunteer. The article described him as an amateur acoustician with an interest in what it called shaped sound environments. He built the pool, not the concrete and tile, the air, or he designed the volume above the water to do something specific. And when the explosion happened 12 years later, he knew the space could be used for what he needed to do. And the county said no. I believe, and I have no proof beyond the manual, the blueprint, the name list, and the evidence of my own unconscious hands, that Emil Moravec spent the rest of his life preparing the natatorium for a reading that was never authorized, that the manual describes the precise interior arrangement required to make the space function as he intended, that the arrangement was never completed because the pool remained in operation until 1991, and Moravec died in 1987 according to county death records. He died 6 years after the pool closed. He died 4 years before it was drained and filled with shelving and boxes. He died without reading the names. And then the county filled his instrument with exactly the kind of material in on-site dense, rectangular, paper-filled boxes that his manual specified as the optimal medium for acoustic shaping. I don't know if what I'm about to say is true. I know it is consistent with everything I observed. The arrangement my body was building during the lapses followed the manual specifications exactly. I checked. During conscious hours, over the course of 2 weeks in December, I compared the emerging structure on the deep end floor to the diagrams in the manual. Every box was where the manual said a mass of that approximate density should be. Every gap corresponded to what the manual called a return channel, a path for sound to travel outward, reflect, and reconverge at a focal point above the center of the pool. My body was building the instrument, and it was ahead of schedule. I need to tell you about the voice. In early December, I set up a recording, a small digital audio recorder on my workstation running continuously. I wanted to know what I did during the lapses, whether I spoke, whether I made sounds, whether there was any audible component to the work. The first 3 recordings captured nothing unusual. The sound of boxes being moved, footsteps on tile, breathing regular and calm, calmer than my waking breathing actually measured. The breathing of a person doing focused physical work without strain. On the 4th recording, December 11th, there was a voice. It was my voice. I know my own voice on recordings. Everyone's voice sounds wrong to them on playback, thinner, higher, different. I know what my voice sounds like from the outside. This was my voice. But it was doing something I've never done. It was reading names. Not the 26 names from the list. Other names. Hundreds of them. A continuous, steady, unhurried recitation of full names, first, middle, last, with no pauses longer than a breath between them. The rhythm was precise, each name given exactly the same duration, the same tonal shape, the same care. No name rushed, no name emphasized, Every name delivered as if it were the only one. The names went on for the entire duration of the lapse, 1 hour and 43 minutes. I estimated, based on the rhythm, that my voice spoke approximately 400 names during that session. I did not recognize any of them. I listened to the recording 3 times. On the third listen, I started writing the names down. I searched them. The first 30 I checked were all real people, all dead, all from Jefferson County, all from the period between 1950 and 1980. Some died in industrial accidents, some in car wrecks, some of natural causes, some as children. The only thing they had in common was that they were dead, and they were from here. And I'd never heard of any of them. My voice was reading the county's dead, and it was practicing. I know it was practicing because the recordings from subsequent sessions showed refinement. Not in pronunciation, every name was already spoken clearly, but in the acoustic relationship between the voice and the space. On December 11th, the voice had a slight reverb, a tail of sound that muddied the consonants of the names that followed. By December 18th, the reverb was shorter. By January 3rd, it was gone. The names were arriving clean, each one discreet. Each one, as the manual would say, delivered. The arrangement on the pool floor was changing between sessions. My body was tuning the room by moving boxes during the lapses, and my voice was testing the result by reading names into the reshaped air, and the 2 processes were converging toward a condition that the manual described in its final chapter. The final chapter of the manual is 3 pages long. It describes the completed arrangement, which Moravec calls the seating, and the procedure for what he calls the reading. The reading is not a memorial in any sense I understand. It is not for the living. There is no audience. The manual specifies that the reading must occur in an empty room, not empty of furniture, empty of the living. The reader must be present, but, in Moravec's words, not in attendance. The reader's consciousness must be absent. The voice must operate without the interference of the speaker's awareness, because awareness introduces what Moravec calls self-hearing, and self-hearing is a form of interception. The names must pass from the mouth through the shaped air to their destinations without being heard by the person speaking them. This is why the lapses, this is why the unconsciousness. The reading requires a voice that is not being listened to by its owner. I understood then why the previous temps had left. Not because they were afraid of working alone in a pool, because they woke up standing in the wrong place with dust on their hands and no memory. And they did what any rational person would do. They quit. And the arrangement, each time, was partially dismantled by the next occupant of the deep end, who moved the boxes back where they belonged without knowing what they were undoing. And the process started over with the next body, the next voice. I was not the first person to build the seating. I was the first person to let it get this far. By mid-January, the arrangement was nearly complete. I could see it in the manual. The diagram for the final configuration and the actual layout on the deep end floor were converging. There were perhaps 15 boxes left to place. 2 more wooden crates had surfaced from somewhere in the building. I found them at the top of the stairs one morning, as if they'd walked there, and their contents were positioned during lapses at locations the manual marked as terminal nodes. My recording showed the voice growing more confident. Make is not louder. The volume never changed, but the certainty in each name was increasing, the way a musician's certainty increases in the final rehearsals before a performance. Every name was being given its full weight. Every name was being sent somewhere, and the names were no longer strangers. On January 14th, I recognized one. Ruth Ann Kazmierczak, my great-aunt, died 1971. I had never met her. I barely knew her name. but my voice spoke it with the same measured care it gave every other name, and the sound went up into the 34 feet of air above the deep end and did not come back. I need to tell you what I decided and why. On January 22nd, I brought the manual home. I read the final chapter again. The reading, once the seating was complete, would take approximately 11 hours. Moravec estimated this based on the number of dead the space was designed to serve. The natatorium's acoustic volume, correctly configured, could deliver names across what he described as the full municipal span of unaddressed death between 1929 and the date of reading. Every person who died in the city or county without a formal public speaking of their name in a dedicated space, without a funeral that named them aloud, without a memorial, without a reading, would be reached. Thousands of names, maybe tens of thousands, spoken by a voice operating without its owner, into air shaped by a dead man's mathematics, and received by no one living. I sat with this for a long time. I want to be honest about what I felt, because what I felt is the reason I made the choice I made. And I need you to understand that the choice was not made in fear or under compulsion. I felt, and I am aware of how inadequate this word is, willing. Not because something was making me willing. Not because the lapses had eroded my judgment. But because I understood what Moravec had spent his life trying to do, and I understood that it was not sinister, and I understood that the only thing preventing it was the county's refusal in 1975 and the accident of the pool's closure and the further accident of the building's conversion to storage, which placed the right materials in the right space without anyone knowing what they were furnishing. And I understood that my body already knew how to do it. My voice was ready. The seating was almost finished. The only question was whether I would resist the final sessions or let them happen. Yarki, I want to describe what resistance would have meant because I considered it carefully. I could have quit. The arrangement would be partially dismantled by the next temp or by Gale or by whoever eventually entered the deep end. The process would start over. Another body, another voice, another set of lapses over another set of months, converging on the same configuration until someone either let it complete or the building was demolished. Or I could stay, I could come to work, I could set no alarms. I could sit at my table and close my eyes and let the hands and the voice do what they had been learning to do. The violation was real. I want to be clear about that. My body had been used without my knowledge or consent. Months of work had been performed through me that I did not choose. In the fact that I found the purpose beautiful did not erase the fact that no one asked me. Moravec's design required an unconscious instrument. The manual was explicit. The reader cannot consent to the reading because consent is a form of awareness, and awareness disrupts the delivery. The reader must be, in Moravec's precise and terrible word, borrowed. I was borrowed for months without asking, and the borrowing had produced the most meticulous, purposeful, and careful work my body had ever done. I looked at the seating, the hundreds of boxes arranged in curves and lines and clusters across the deep end floor, and I recognized something I had never seen in any work I'd done consciously. Devotion. My unconscious hands had devotion. They placed each box the way my voice placed each name, as if it were the only one. On January 29th, I went to the natatorium. I descended the stairs. I turned off the overhead fluorescents. I sat in the folding chair at my workstation with the emergency exit sign casting red light across the tile. I set the audio recorder running. I closed my eyes. I want to tell you I remember what happened. I want to tell you I heard the names, that I was present for the reading, that I experienced the 11 hours from the inside. But Moravec was right. The design requires absence. I was not there. I opened my eyes and it was 8:17 p.m. The deep end was dark. The arrangement had changed. I could feel it in the way the space sounded when I exhaled. The air was different, looser. The compression that had been building for weeks was gone. The room felt like a room again, just a room. Tile and concrete and boxes and a woman sitting in a folding chair in the dark, very tired, with a dry throat and dust on her hands and absolutely no memory of speaking. I picked up the recorder. The file was 11 hours, 4 minutes, and 31 seconds long. I have not listened to it. I need to tell you why, and then I need to tell you what I found the next morning, and then I need to stop. I have not listened to the recording because Moravec's manual says the reading must not be heard by the living. The names must pass through the shaped air without interception. If I listen to the playback, I become an audience. The names already delivered would be pulled back into a living ear. I don't know if I believe this. I don't know if acoustic delivery to the dead is something that can be intercepted retroactively by pressing play on a digital recorder in a one-bedroom apartment in Wintersville, Ohio. But I've not listened. The file sits on the recorder. The recorder sits in a drawer in my kitchen, and I have not deleted it, and I have not played it. What I found the next morning, I returned to the natatorium at 7 a.m. on January 30th. I descended the stairs. The seating was still in place, every box, every crate, exactly where my hands had put them. But in the center of the arrangement, on the dark blue lane line where the manual's diagrams marked the focal point of the acoustic volume, there was a single sheet of paper. It was the name list, the original. 26 names in block capitals. November 8th, 1974. But the 12 names below the hand-drawn line, the 12 unrecorded dead, the contract workers, the day laborers, the men who were never on any payroll and never on any plaque, each of those 12 names had been crossed out, not violently, not in anger. Each name had a single, careful horizontal line drawn through it. Though in a hand, I recognized, because I had been reading it for months. Emil Moravec's handwriting. Crossing out the names, not to erase them, but the way you cross an item off a list when the item has been completed. The 14 names above the line, the official dead, the men on the plaque, were not crossed out. I stood in the deep end of the drained municipal swimming pool, holding a piece of paper that told me the reading had worked for 12 of 26 and not for 14. And I understood, with the kind of understanding that arrives as weight rather than thought, that the 14 men on the plaque did not need the reading. They had been named, publicly, permanently, in bronze on Water Street. They had been spoken for. The 12 below the line had not. Not until last night. Not until my voice, operating without me, you shaped their names into air that Moravec spent 25 years learning to tune, and the sound went where it needed to go. My contract ended in March. I completed the document, rehousing on schedule. Gail said I was the best temp they'd had on the project. I did not tell her about the lapses, the recording, the manual, or the seating. The boxes are still arranged the way my hands left them. No one has moved them. No one goes down there. I took the manual and the name list and the blueprint and the recording. I have them in a box in my apartment. Not a banker's box, a wooden one. I don't know where it came from. I found it in my car on the last day. I have one more thing to say, and I have put it off. Because saying it requires me to admit something I have been circling since October. And in the 11 weeks between the completion of the reading and the end of my contract, I did not lapse once. My body was my own for every minute of every shift. My hands did only what I told them to do. The natatorium was quiet. The air above the deep end was just air. Whatever had borrowed me was finished with me, and the return was total. But 3 nights ago, April 14th, I woke at 2 a.m. in my apartment in Wintersville, standing in my kitchen in the dark, with my mouth open and my throat raw. The recorder was out of the drawer. It was running. And the file, the 11-hour file I've never played, was 3 minutes longer than it was in January. I don't know whose names are being added. I don't know if the space in the natatorium is still active, shaped by an arrangement no one has disturbed, each waiting for sound that is now being generated 7 miles away in a kitchen that was never tuned for anything. I don't know if Moravec accounted for this, for the voice learning to work without the instrument, the way a musician eventually hears the concert hall in their own living room. I know that my throat was raw. I know the file is growing. I know that people in Jefferson County are still dying, and most of them are dying without a public reading of their name in a space that will hold it correctly. And I know that Moravec's design was not for a single evening, but for a post. The way the manual describes it in a passage I did not mention earlier, because I was not ready to say it out loud. The reading is not an event. The reading is a responsibility. The vessel, once made acceptable, does not close. The voice, once trained, does not untrain. The dead do not stop arriving. The reader does not retire. The reader is the post. I was not the first person to sleep through the work. I was the first person to stay long enough to finish it. And now I understand that finishing it was not the end of anything. It was an appointment to a position that Emil Moravec held alone for 12 years until he died without a successor. And that has been vacant since 1987, and that found me in a drained swimming pool in October because I was the right kind of desperate. The kind that couldn't afford to quit when my hands started moving on their own. I don't know if I'm writing this as a warning or a report or an application for relief. I don't know who would grant relief from this or what form it would take. Ivar, I know that tonight I will go to sleep in my bed in my apartment, and I may wake up in my kitchen with a raw throat and a recorder running and a name on my lips that I will not remember, spoken into ordinary air that may or may not be shaped well enough to deliver it. And I know that if my kitchen is not the natatorium, if the air here cannot hold the names correctly, then the names are falling, spoken and undelivered, scattered into apartment acoustics that were never designed to carry anything heavier than a phone conversation. And I know that Moravec would say I need to go back, and I know that the pool is still drained, and the seating is still in place, and the building is unlocked, and my key still works, and the drive is 11 minutes, and my voice already knows the way. I haven't gone back. I want to be clear about that. I am writing this at my kitchen table with the recorder in the drawer and the key on the counter and the manual in the wooden box and the names of the newly dead accumulating in a county that does not know it is being served by a woman who did not apply for the job and cannot resign from it because the resignation would have to be tendered to a man who has been dead since 1987 and who, I suspect, would not accept it. The recorder is running. I checked. I did not start it. The file is now 11 hours, 11 minutes, and 6 seconds. The names are ahead of me, and I am the only mouth they have.